Board of Elections perspective tonight.
The Dan York State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Taco Comfort Solutions.
So this ongoing story regarding the speaker, even though the speaker will tell you it's got nothing to do with him, sort of. The Nick Mattiello saga, the indictment of one of his political consultants this past week is still a hot topic in the news, and the speaker's appearance on radio 2 days ago has only buoyed my interest in this conversation, because I'm quite certain that he is 57 feet over an 11-foot board at this point. He has put himself in a position here where he has suggested that he knew nothing about that which is the foundational controversy. The Board of Elections spent a couple of years looking at this, and the vice chairman of it will join us momentarily to offer his investigative perspective on the case. So welcome in. Glad to have you in, Rabbit. Glad to have you in, Rabbit. Here's a headline from today from the president. He talks about a ceasefire here as if the entire thing is resolved. Ask the Kurds if they're happy. I don't think the idea that 10,000 Kurds are not going to be killed in a conflict is not necessarily a win, Mr. President. The strategy was ill thought out, and the patchwork is probably not permanent. You even admitted it today. So before we start boasting about how we've resolved how to deal with Middle Eastern and international affairs, why don't we just let this thing simmer for a couple of days? Sanctions being lifted seems like a, I don't know, premature thing to do, but we'll get some expertise on this over the next week, promise you. In the meantime, interesting development here. As we record the show, and we do each early afternoon, our Attorney General here in Rhode Island, Peter Nerone, is having a press conference. We can put this headline up, though. I think we know that there are going to be no charges to result from this August confrontation where a security person, a correctional officer at the Wyatt Detention Center, lost his patience and bumped some people with his vehicle as the protesters there regarding immigration and some, I guess, their belief about Wyatt policy were going on. The Attorney General spoke to us here about that case and said he was taking it under advisement. He expressed, as anybody would, his discomfort with what apparently went on. Why there are no charges, I'm sure he'll explain. And by coincidence, he's coming to tomorrow's taping of our Friday broadcast. So make a note of that, and we'll get all the details on it. In the meantime, the scores are in. The scores are in. Headlines are not good. The new Ed Commissioner, who was here only a couple of days ago on Monday, reflected on the work that we have to do.
The RICAS results were up from last year, but still showed only a minority of students in Rhode Island are meeting expectations in math and English language arts.
That means that 38% of the kids can read on grade level. I don't know about you, but I wouldn't be, raising any victory flags about that.
Urban districts continue to have the lowest proficiency rates. In Central Falls, just 8% of students are meeting expectations in math, and 13% are meeting expectations in ELA. Woonsocket and Providence fare better, but still well below the average. The state is slated to take over Providence schools next Friday, led by Education Commissioner Angelica Infante Green.
The places that are struggling the most have been struggling historically. So what we do in Providence, and Providence is our capital city and where the majority of the kids are, will benefit Central Falls. We will have a Central Falls strategy that we'll be ready to announce sometime in the next few months.
Infante Green is using the Crowley Act to intervene in Providence schools. We asked her if she would do the same in Central Falls.
We'll see. We'll see.
Well, look, you bite off more than you can chew. You got digestive problems, right? The city of Providence is a huge project. Not that the kids in Central Falls aren't as much of a concern, but before we all start getting cocky about the idea that we are not Providence, or we're not Central Falls, or we're not Woonsocket, those of you who are not, we ought to think about the comparisons. Now, this is kind of a distorted statistic, but if you took the entire district of Rhode Island, say Rhode Island was a school district, and you put it into Massachusetts, we'd be performing at 10%, like at the bottom 10%. when it comes to these scores. That's a little bit specious in one sense, because we don't have districts that big, other than if you called it Boston, one of them. The real comparison is taking the socioeconomic and population data from a like community in Rhode Island to Massachusetts. In other words, Barrington's like community, of standard of living and the makeup, significantly behind. So before Barrington gets all cocky about how they're performing at the top, and East Greenwich gets all cocky, and even my own hometown of Cumberland, which has made some improvements, gets all cocky, winning the freshman or JV game is not the goal here, unless we just decide that in Rhode Island we are the freshman or the JV, right? All right, in the meantime, here is the saga from which we are going to work today or tonight with our guest. Here's the Eyewitness News package that kind of summarizes the story itself.
This was the mailer sent out by Republican Shauna Lawton in 2016, endorsing Democratic Speaker Nicholas Mattiello for state rep in Cranston after she lost the Republican primary in that race to Stephen Frias. Now Attorney General Peter Nerona says a grand jury has indicted former Mattiello advisor Jeff Britt, accusing him of laundering money to Lawton through a campaign donor to pay for that mailer.
Rhode Island's election laws exist for a reason: to ensure transparency in our elections. Mr. Britt, as alleged here, thwarted these goals by intentionally and unlawfully disguising the true source of the funds used to pay for Ms. Lawton's mailer endorsing Speaker Mattiello.
Here's what Speaker Mattiello told us about it in 2016.
I came to the conclusion that nobody in my campaign has any knowledge of that issue.
Britt's attorney, Robert Carenti, says, "We believe that the evidence at trial will leave Rhode Islanders scratching their heads about who did and who did not get charged, and will show that Mr. Britt was used by the Mattiello campaign as a fall guy." But a spokesperson for Mattiello's campaign says these proceedings do not involve the speaker. The Board of Elections resolved this issue for the campaign approximately 1 year ago.
This criminal conduct had everything to do with the speaker. It was about helping him get reelected.
Frias lost to Mattiello by just 85 votes in that 2016 election.
And it's kind of embarrassing even to be represented by somebody like him. I don't understand why the speaker surrounds himself with these kinds of criminals.
A dramatic statement by Mr. Frias. I will suggest to you that if you remember in 2016, the speaker lost at the machines. He won by 85 votes when the mail ballots came in. And who demonstrably ran that particular part of the campaign effort? Mr. Britt, by all accounts, lawfully. This is quite the saga. The Vice Chairman of the Board of Elections, retired Judge Steve Erickson, is here. Thank you, sir. Appreciate you for coming in.
Flunked retirement, but I'm here.
Yes. Yeah, I know. Listen, can't you walk away? Do you know how to play some golf?
I don't play golf.
Yeah,
so.
well, you know what? Well, you have the knees worked on, so let's get a golf club.
That's right.
Thank you for coming in. The trial of this case began when the GOP filed the complaints.
That's correct.
Okay, give me some of that background before we get into the nitty-gritties of this whole thing.
So,
the executive summary about the process.
The process is you file a complaint with the Board of Elections if you feel somebody's violated the campaign finance law. The board conducts an investigation which is not done publicly. It's supposed to be confidential, and then the results of that investigation are made public. And if it's necessary, or if the board feels that it should happen, then there's a referral to the Attorney General for further review if we feel that there's any particular conduct that we think rises to the level of criminality. Usually that's involving people who spend campaign finance funds inappropriately. So most of the referrals we've made have been about campaign finance violations where people spend money on their own behalf, et cetera, and so forth. This is really the first one that we've referred where it involves something more significant in terms of the violation of the campaign finance law in general.
Speaking of, specifically, that violation is?
The violation was with respect to the money that was used to pay for the mailer, whether it constituted an independent expenditure or whether it was a coordinated effort.
An independent expenditure would be defined as?
Somebody who is not connected to the campaign spending money on behalf of, in support of somebody, an individual who's
Like if
running
I
for
just
office.
decided that I wanted to weigh in on an election and I spent my own money to put a flyer out,
Right.
I can do that.
Right. But
Do
you
I still
can't
have
coordinate.
I have to report that
Right,
though.
but you can't coordinate the message or the information or the timing with the campaign.
Right. And the Board of Elections found in this particular case that it was a what?
Well, you know, it was one of two things, and that's the problem that we had with it, because at one point it appeared to be a coordinated expenditure, another time it appeared to be an independent expenditure, but there were questions about how it was financed and reported. So
Ms. Lawton didn't have a pot to, you know what, in her campaign account.
she had $24.
Yeah, and so
somewhere around
her
that.
being able to finance a couple of $1,000s worth of expense for the mailer
Right.
Was at the core of this issue.
That's correct.
I think we do have to we have to we have to say that this is not a lot of money that we're talking about here, but I'm guessing it is principal acts that are mostly at stake.
That's correct, because most campaigns in Rhode Island are relatively inexpensive. Even these days, if somebody is spending $10,000 or $15,000 on a campaign for state legislature, that is not a lot of money in terms of the overall campaign finance law.
Right.
But if individuals are ignoring the statute, if they're not filing their reports, if they're intentionally not reporting the sources of contributions, those are problems. And the fact that somebody doesn't report the source of a contribution under the law is as significant a violation as if somebody spent money inappropriately and then fixed that report afterwards. So you have to look at the nature of the violation, not just the amount in question.
Gotcha. When we come back, we'll dig into this case a little further. Stay with us, please. So this is what resulted. Former Mattiello aide is indicted. Jeff Britt is his name, and this whole saga regarding, and if you got to go backwards in the show, so hopefully you're recording it, or you can check us on DohertyPRI.com, Facebook, Twitter to kind of rewind the case, because I don't have time more or less to restate it, other than to say we're talking about a campaign finance case that the Board of Elections had a real hard, difficult time getting cooperation for the facts over a near couple-year period of time, or a couple-year period of time, regarding the 2016 election for District 15, Rep. Mattiello's seat, where he won by 85 votes, and the candidate who ran a Republican primary and lost heavily transferred her support via a flyer to Speaker Mattiello. The cost of it was financed for her, and that really is at the crux of the case. She got a couple $1,000s. Interestingly enough, it seems apparent here through board's work and the Attorney General's work and journalistic work that two people wrote checks to Ms. Lawton's campaign. Both those people were involved in the Mattiello campaign. Yes?
Apparently.
Apparently. One of the donor one, as the indictment of Mr. Britt indicates, received cash, allegedly, from Mr. Britt, turned that into a checking account, wrote a check to Ms. Lawton. Ms. Lawton took the two $1,000 checks and issued her payment for the mailer. The speaker is running around right now suggesting that he's got nothing to do with this, was unwitting to the whole situation. Began that story back on November 4th of 2016, just prior to Election Day, when the news of this came out, when the Republicans filed their complaint. Do you buy that?
I don't think it's for me to buy or not to buy. It's for other people that observe the environment to make their own decisions about a person and what they did or didn't do. All I know is that we had certain amounts of evidence before us, and we acted on the evidence that we had. Are you suggesting to me that I think that people who are involved in campaigns, and particularly some individuals who are various consultants for hire, might operate on the theory of better to ask forgiveness than permission? I think that happens quite a bit in campaigns based upon my personal experience. So it's not for me to buy or not buy anything. It's a question of what evidence was before the board and what evidence was before the grand jury.
Let me ask you this. The forwarding of this case to the Attorney General's office is what caused Peter Nerona, our current Attorney General, to pick it up.
Correct.
Interestingly enough, you suggested in a couple of tweets. Can we put the tweets up? Recent tweets by.
What did I say?
You got the Twitter disease. It's a bad virus, by the way. If the affidavits had raised additional questions, we had the option of live testimony. Although if we had tried to do that under the prior AG, we probably would still be seeing a stone wall to compel that. And another tweet here. You're right. Given the lack of support from the AG at the time, we had to work with limited enforcement capacity. That's now changed. I don't think you'll see that stonewall in the future.
Yep.
You expressed satisfaction that the AG, the current AG, Peter Nerona, not only followed up on this case, but supported the Board of Elections
That's
work in
correct.
it.
And we heard that message starting on January 1. Actually, we started hearing that message before January 1 in terms of the transition at the Attorney General's office, that we were going to be seeing a lot more engagement, involvement from the Attorney General's office in campaign finance cases, and that they were going to be treating them seriously. We didn't have that before.
So you forwarded this case to the Attorney General's office, then under the custody of Peter Kilmartin in the fall of 2018.
That's correct. September, I believe.
Right. So
Yeah.
he didn't have a lot of time to act on it, and you can decide, folks, any way you want to, as to whether or not he would have had a temperament or interest in this. I've been very clear. I think he's the biggest hack we ever elected to public office. So that's where I stand on that. But the send of the case more or less was intriguing to me, because there is no direct recommendation from the Board of Elections to say, we think this happened, please prosecute.
That's because we are not responsible. We are not the responsible agency for determining whether we feel there's sufficient evidence beyond a reasonable doubt to prosecute the case. That's what the Attorney General does.
But you will establish evidence to fine and to charge people under the civil action and
That's
authority
correct.
that you have.
Lower standard.
Lower
standard of proof.
Gotcha. So you kick the case over, it's picked up, Mr. Britt ends up being indicted, seemingly and allegedly as the one who supplied $1,000 worth of cash to donor one, who then turned it into a check. Look, I'm not born yesterday, and I happen to know Mr. Britt pretty well. Most members of the working media do.
I've never met him.
You've never met him?
Never met him.
Interesting. I think you probably find him a very engaging guy. You are. I think you guys might get along. Here's the thing. Under no circumstances would Jeff Britt put $1,000 into somebody's pocket without a reimbursement expectation. Mm-hmm. And anybody who's got half an instinct on this would want to get that answer. Why didn't the board?
That was brought out at the grand jury, not in the affidavits that were in front of us.
But why wouldn't you pursue that? First of all, the Speaker of the House never testified. And by the way, you know, and I know, that attorneys who testify have an obligation of a higher standard. You're one, you're a judge. You have a higher standard.
Right.
He couldn't come and lie.
Right.
Another one of his campaign staffers, Matt Jerzyk, who's I'm guessing is principally responsible for the content of the flyer, he couldn't come and lie. In general, I have empathy for the board, because you couldn't get a lot of people to come and say anything.
That's correct.
Right.
I think
In fact,
that's going to change.
You had to threaten them with contempt in order
That's
for them
right.
to put some stuff in writing, but that's the best that you guys could get out of those particular players?
That's all we could do. We don't have a lot of staff. We have a very thin staff on the campaign finance side. We don't have any actual investigators. So when you look at the staff we have and what they're responsible for doing, and the fact that we have never previously done contempt. We had one prior contempt case, and we hadn't done this type of criminal referral. Each one of these steps constituted new ground for the board to take in terms of trying to enforce the law.
Okay.
So,
The Speaker's making assertions like, "Hey, listen, ain't my deal. I got nothing to do with it." We'll try to put that in context, or I will when we come back. Stay with us.
I did not know what was going on with that mailer, and after two very thorough investigations, there's been no indication from anybody that I knew anything about this. Right. You've got a campaign worker who clearly was trying to impress and ingratiate and come up and say, wow, look what I did for you. I blew this campaign open for you. And I did not know.
Let me just suggest to you a couple of things. Based on the information in the Board of Elections, good work. Mr. Jerzyk is cleared to have focused on the content of the
That's
flyer. Checkmate Consulting, the marketing publicity agency, put out the flyer.
That's correct.
Two of the more prominent political players in the state run that organization. All three of whom, seeing the compelling nature of this cross-promotional move on the part of a fledgling Republican candidate to support the Speaker, would certainly have been checking in with the Speaker as to what to say with these things. You don't have to say that. I'm going to say that. Under no circumstances, anybody who follows politics in this town would you ever even guess that the Speaker didn't have some knowledge of this? And the idea that Mr. Britt was trying to fancy himself with the Speaker admitted yesterday on the radio, or 2 days ago on the radio, that he hired Mr. Britt away from the competition, whoever that was going to be, in order to not have the target of Mr. Britt firing at him. Mr. Britt is not the kind of guy that is looking for a rub of his tummy, so to speak. And so this is what puzzles me. Do this for me. Tell me if the Board of Elections exonerated Speaker Mattiello from responsibility in this saga.
When people come before a court, they're found not guilty. That means there's no evidence to support the charge against them. This came before the Board of Elections. Based on the evidence we had, we found nothing that constituted a connection that we felt in good conscience we could refer. There's a difference between policy, politics, and law.
Yet the campaign of Mattiello had to reimburse Ms. Lawton for the money.
They did that, yes, they did, because they identified it as an excess contribution by accepting responsibility for the mailer. By accepting responsibility for the mailer, the campaign then had too much money paid to it by Lawton, so they then reimbursed it. That's how they then viewed it, which is
Answer the question directly again, if you would,
Sure.
respectfully. Did the Board of Elections exonerate the Speaker of the House?
Did we exonerate? We made no finding.
Big difference.
We never say somebody didn't do something. We say there's no evidence of this having been done.
You never spoke to the Speaker directly.
We
You never spoke to Mr. Jerzyk directly.
Not only did we...
You never spoke to Checkmate Consulting directly.
Nope, nope, nope.
And I'm wondering if the Attorney General did.
I don't know.
We'll find
You can
out.
ask him
He's
tomorrow.
coming in tomorrow
By the
for
way,
a Friday program.
he used to appear in my court. It was the first court he was in.
Well, I know this. He's a good man. And,
He's a great man.
And a well-elected official in my
Yes.
mind. So we'll keep getting to the bottom of it.
Okay.
Appreciate your coming in.
All right.
Thanks, Steve. Final word when we come back. Tomorrow night we'll look at some of the development success over Quonset, one of our hidden economic gems that doesn't always get a lot of attention. And then on Friday, the Attorney General will come in here. He'll talk to us about the Wyatt non-prosecution and this particular Board of Elections Speaker Mattiello case. All right, we'll see you on the radio too at 3 until 6 on WPRO. Good night.